Shall we start the session, ma'am?
Yes, we can start.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Good afternoon, and all. It gives me an immense pleasure to welcome you all for this 1 month gender sensitization and capacity building program on gender, society, economy, and polity, organized by Department of Women's Studies, Bharathidasan University, Center for Women's Studies, and National Service Scheme of Kaveri College for Women, and Regional Association of Women's Studies, RAS. I welcome you all. May I now request Professor N. Manimegalai, Director and Head, Dean, Faculty of Arts, Department of Women's Studies, Bharathidasan University, to welcome and to introduce our today's resource person. Welcome you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Dr. Neela. As usual, I thank Kaveri College and particularly Dr. Neela for the continuous support and arranging everything in order every day. And with that note, I'm happy to welcome both the speaker and the participants. And since now it is flooding in various online programs and clashes with this time, and this is a 1 month long time, we really get the participant joining little late. Maybe the earlier program would have got over late. So that is why, otherwise we used to have some 200 and odd participants joining here every day. And I'm very happy that this program could be conducted in collaboration with the other organization, as UGC said. And we have an eminent resource person today, Professor Saiba Hussain, and you all must be getting to your library the Women's Link journal. So that journal is really edited by Professor Saiba, and she is currently the professor and director at Sarojini Naidu Center for Women Development Studies, Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi. It's a central university. So we are very happy to have such a renowned scholar is with us today to talk on very important issue which we haven't touched for the past 2 weeks. That is about the issues of women in Islam, and she has been specializing in that area also. She had her degrees, MA, MPhil, PhD programs from Jawaharlal Nehru University. So we are getting Jane White's, and she is also added to the list from the Center for Study of Social System. And her areas of interest include gender and development, health and livelihood issues, minority issues, including issues of Muslim women and their struggle for the rights and entitlements, both in the public and private domains. So very important areas. But the very areas of interest itself conveys how she is concerned with the issues of the marginalized and the minorities. And she teaches women's studies there, and in addition engaged extensively in research on gender issues, the problems faced by women and in the contemporary time. And she has authored 5 books and contributed to several research articles, which were all published in national and international academic journals. And she has been continuously publishing also. She has presented research papers in the national and international seminars, both within and outside the country. And she has completed both major research projects funded by various government agencies, minor and major research projects. And she has been in various committees also, and I had an opportunity to be with her, the NCW Evaluation Project Committee, where we shared the same meeting. And she has also been associated with the Indian Association for Women's Studies and one of the core research committee, organizing committee persons there in the recent 16th IAWS National Conference. And we had an opportunity to interact in various areas for the 4-5 days staying there in Delhi. And she is not only known to academics, but also as an activist promoting the rights of women, fighting against the discrimination and marginalization of women. As I already pointed out, she's a fighter and still fighting. And she has been selected for the International Visiting Leadership Program, United States of America, and has been sponsored by UN Habitat International, Islamic University, Malaysia, to understand 1 week workshop on, to attend the one week workshop on land, property and housing rights in the Muslim world. She is also the member of various committees within and outside the universities and the governing board of NGOs and development organization. She is the editor, I already told, Women's Link Journal, and you can contribute to that journal. And I only wish Dr. Savia to get in this Women's Link journal to go into the UGC CARE list, so that quality papers will be published and will get recognized with the UGC CARE list also. And Professor Savia is also a recipient of Teacher Fellowship of University Grants Commission and the General Fellowship of Indian Council for Social Science Research and the National Merit Scholarship. So such a renowned scholar, feminist, activist, and teacher and researcher who is present with us to share on the important area of topic which we have to necessarily include in this 1 month long gender sensitization. So I welcome Professor on behalf of all the participants and also the organizing partners. And I do welcome all the participants who have been participating in the 1 month long program, and some more will join. Maybe when you start, people will join. That is what it is happening for the reasons I have already mentioned. So welcome, Professor Savia, and we are eagerly waiting to listen to you. Welcome. I also welcome my colleagues from the department, Dr. Murugeshwari, Dr. Shubha, Shamim Banu, Ms. Jayanti, and also Dr. Neela, who is coordinating and conducting from the college side. Thank you. Thank you very much. Over to Neela.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much for your nice introduction. May I now request today's eminent resource person, Professor Savia Hussain, Director, Sarojini Naidu Center for Women Studies, Tamil, Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi, to take over the session. Welcome you, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much. First of all, at the very outset, I would like to thank all the organizers for conducting this program. And though I could not get the time to attend all, but I have been looking at the WhatsApp messages about this, and it's running very successfully. So I congratulate the organizers for keeping this program. And thank you so much for the introduction. Although I have very little contribution to make in the women's studies area, but I try my level best to do something for the women, especially women from the minority community or the marginalized women. So when Mani Meklai asked me to speak, and she has given me the topic gender issues in Islam. So I have divided my presentation into two parts. One part, because both the parts are very important to ponder upon. One is the Quranic text, the primary source in where gender equality has been talked about. And the second section deals with the Muslim Women Act 2019. Why I chose both the issues, because what have been said in the text is not being practiced in reality. And secondly, Muslim Women Act, it's almost it's one year since it has been passed. So what are my observation, my reservation about this act? I will be talking after giving the whole theoretical perspective about gender in Islam, gender equality in Islam. So to begin with, it is very important that while assessing the gender equality in Islam or realities of Muslim women's life, we need to avoid two extremes. One is justifying injustices done to most Muslim women by religiously flavored cultural argument. I'm emphasizing the word cultural arguments. Second, the subtle assumption of correctness of traditional cultural practices and attitudes, followed by a selective search for endorsement in the primary source of Islam. Although these are the cultural practices, but we always try to dig the source from the original text, which is very difficult to find, because Islam as far as textual Islam is concerned, it is generally against the contemporary negative portrayal or stereotypes about gender issues in Islam. Although Islam has advocated the concept of gender equality since the revelation of the Quran. Many people say that Quran, whenever I have spoken about Muslim women, I come across several questions. If Quran has said there is equal relationship, gender equality in Islam, then why Muslim women are still lagging behind in all socio-economic political aspects? So I tried to read the Quran, the verses in which, especially 4-5 surahs, and try to interpret those surahs from women's perspective, from a gender perspective. I would say it from a gender perspective. So Islam teaches equal worth, status of two genders, men and women are from the same creation. Islam does not blame the women for the original sin. Religious education and religious obligations are the same for both men and women. Islam assures moral and legal equality of the two genders. Islam fosters dual and not unisex society. There should be no competition between the sexes. They should work together and have a just division of labor. Women get equal reward for equal work. The women, however, should not force to do exactly what man does. She can get equal reward for alternative work. Islam also assures economic independence of women and their economic freedom. Both men and women are required to be modest, but in different ways. Islam establishes interdependency. I have highlighted the word interdependency and not individualism. Men and women need one another, the women an individual and not an appendage of man. The Quran addresses women directly, not through the agency of men. This is also very important, which many of us are ignorant of. So both men and women, the Quran addresses women directly, not through the agency of man. A woman must, as an individual, accept the Islamic creed to be a Muslim. Ibadat by a woman, prayer, Ibadat by a woman is her personal responsibility. She has a direct devotion to God without having any man intercede on her behalf. The woman is accountable for her work on the earth and in the hereafter as an individual, not as a wife, as a mother, as a daughter, but as an individual. The Prophet taught that there is no difference in the worth between believers on the basis of gender. Both enjoy the same rights and duties to learn and teach. Women have the same duty as men to restrain themselves and others from evil and encourage themselves and others towards good. Islam placed paradise under the feet of mother. They became the reason why fathers would enter paradise and also such an integral part of husband's faith, and without honoring his wife, his faith remained incomplete. It was with this newly acquired status that women soared high and made their distinguishing mark in history so as to not be left behind when the greats of Islam were glorified. Women can participate fully in all political spheres with the sole exception of being head of the state. During the time of Prophet, women participated openly in all public activities. They attended Isha prayer in the Prophet's mosque. But there was a controversy that women cannot go to the mosque. So again, this is misunderstanding and misinterpretation. They could express their views on public affairs. In the selection and election of Ottoman women were Among those consulted, there were women engaged in business. Islamic law gives women full competence to own and dispose of property. The Quran actually places very few restrictions on women. Most verses are restrictions on men to prevent their transgression against the rights and modesty of women. It is very interesting. Let me put it in this way, that in Surah Nisa, Surah Maryam, these are the surah from Quran. Everything, it talks about women's rights and men's duties. So, Quran, as far as primary source is concerned, it gives ample scope to a woman to women and her rights. Only thing that I said in the beginning, that there are some stereotyping, some misconception. So we need to ponder upon those misconception made stereotyped. Then there are also evidences that women have been immensely contributing to Islamic history as a scholar, jurist, rulers, warriors, businesswomen, and legal experts. The contribution of women in the preservation of hadith has been great indeed. Hadith, I think, do I need to explain the term hadith?
Yes, because there are not much people who are aware of that. Please.
Okay. So, hadith is sayings of Prophet Muhammad. And sunnah, the other term is sunnah, which is the doing of Prophet Muhammad. So, women have been there in compilation of hadith also. When we talk about the women's contribution in Islamic history, they have been in 7th century, 8th century, 9th century. They all performed various tasks in the public space, not only in the private space, but in public space. So, while there is a misconception that women are not allowed to enter into public space, I have ample evidence from the writings of from the hadith and from the Quran itself that women have been participating in public space. So, having said that, now I'll come to major evidences which I have taken from the Quran. There are some ayat, some surah, and some ayat which specifically focuses on the rights of women and obligations of duties and obligation of men. So that there is one surah. There are several surahs, but I have taken very specific surahs. There is one surah Al-Azhab. This is very important surah because it categorically focuses on gender issues, gender parity, gender equality in Islam. So it says, surely those who submit to God, men and women, those who believe, men and women, those who obey, men and women, those who are truthful, men and women, those who are patient, men and women, those who are modest, men and women, those who are charitable, men and women, those who fast, men and women, those who guard their modesty, men and women, and those who remember their Creator, men and women, God has prepared for them forgiveness and great reward. So, this surah specifically, why I am emphasizing, because whenever we talk about the status of women in Islam, we normally quote the Surah Nisa. But we don't quote this surah which clearly indicates to us equal gender relationship between men and women. So this surah becomes very, very important. The Quran also mentions we have bestowed dignity on progeny of Adam. And this progeny, this dignity is not exclusive to men. So it clearly says, Al-Isra, there is one surah, Al-Isra, in which these line occurs that we have bestowed dignity on progeny of Adam, and progeny of Adam is both men and women. In terms of moral practices, Surah Al-Nahl says, whoever does good, whether male or female, and is a believer, we shall certainly make them live in good life, and we shall certainly give them their reward for the best they have done. Here also we can see that there is no distinction made in terms of gender. Both men and women, the reward, whosoever does good, reward is for both men and women. So, and in terms of education, everyone knows the one Surah Iqra, very quoted Surah, in which I am putting it in quote, the search for knowledge is a duty for every Muslim, male or female, and seek knowledge from the cradle to the grave. Knowledge for a Muslim is not divided into sacred and secular. And the implication of these sayings of Prophet in modern times is that every Muslim boy or girl, man or woman, should pursue his or her education as far as it is possible, bearing in mind the words of Allah in the Quran, only those of his servant who have learned truly fear God. It shows the importance of education irrespective of gender. But the reality is much more complex. In Islam, therefore, both men and women are credited with the capacity of learning and understanding and teaching, and done of the aims of acquiring knowledge is that of becoming more conscious of God. It is considered in Islam that acquiring knowledge is must. In terms of employment also, if we see Surah Al-Imran, it says, then their Lord accepted their prayer and answered them, never will I suffer the work of any worker among you to be lost, whether male or female, the one of you being from the other. This is further emphasized in another ayah of Quran, Surah Al-Nisa, ayah 2. For men is a share of what they have earned, and for women is the share of what they have earned. So men cannot say that, okay, you have earned this much of money, it belongs to me. Whatever he earns, it belongs to him. Whatever women earns, it belongs to her. Hijab, I don't want to go deep into hijab, but I just want to mention there are seven ayats which mentions hijab. Each time to the same, and what hijab is, there are many explanation and understanding of hijab, but hijab exactly in the Quran, in this surah, what has appeared that hijab means curtain, separation, wall, and in other words, anything that hides, masks, and protects something. So dress code, I'm especially mentioning the dress code which has been understood that Islam has put this dress code for women. No, it has used the word hijab, and hijab, what these surahs says, are separation, wall, or curtain. But the verse that has been most often used dwelling for women and mentions the term hijab is the following: oh, you who have believed, do not enter the houses of the Prophet except when you are permitted for a meal. And when you ask his wife for something, ask them from behind a separation. Behind a separation, that is from behind a wall or curtain. So this is also an ayat from Quran chapter 33, ayat 53. Now I'll come to marriage, because marriage and divorce is always related to marriage when it comes to Muslim women, especially for Muslim women. So what does Islam say about marriage? It's a whenever I speak about Muslim women, I hear this, that, oh, this is a contract. This is a contract. Muslim marriage is a contract. Yes, Muslim marriage is a contract. But in this contract, both men and women both of them have given equal chance to put their conditions. When we talk about textual Islam, I'll come to the reality afterwards, but I'm just saying, since the topic is gender in Islam, so there is gender equality, gender parity in Islam, whatever is the issue. So marriage, when we come to marriage in Islam is often describing the love and mutual rights that exist between men and women. Islam puts a strong emphasis on mutual love and respect between a husband and a wife. Men are also specifically commanded to treat their wife with kindness and respect. The Prophet Muhammad is reported to have said, "The most perfect in faith amongst believers is he who is best in manners and kindness to his wife." Fidelity is also highly stressed in Islam. Spouses are expected to be loyal and faithful to one another and seek emotional and sexual pleasure within the bonds of marriage. This I have taken from Surah chapter 4, Surah 1, chapter 7, chapter 25, then again from Surah Nisa. The couple is free to make their marriage agreement as detailed in as they like. If I want to put certain conditions, I am free to put it. If the other person, other partner wants to put conditions, he is free to put the condition. There is no fighting. There is no fighting between men and women that, okay, I want to put this condition and you cannot put this condition. So marriage is so flexible in Islam, but reality is something else. I'm just talking again and again. I'm saying that reality is something else. When I studied in the region of Bihar about marriage and divorce, I found that only 5% of the women, they had nikahnama. So 95% of the women, they don't even have nikahnama to put these conditions. So when we talk about textual Islam, the couple is free to make their marriages agreement as detailed as they like. The contract allows couples to discuss major aspects of their marriage before they become husband and wife and make binding agreements. So Islam teaches that all people are created equal in worth and value regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, or class. Wilaya. The term wilaya, I'll explain what is wilaya. Protectors and supporter of each other. So, the Quran outlines the relationship between men and women as partner, awliya, of one another in establishing a healthy family and just society. The concept of wilaya establishes that men have no level of superiority over women, as God orders both genders to guide one another and keep each other in check. So the concepts which have been appeared in the Quran, it has not been properly explained, properly interpreted, properly understood. Here I would like to mention that the Islamic feminists, they are trying to reinterpret these concepts, which has it has always been a male interpreter of Quranic verses. So the Islamic feminists since 1990s, they have started reinterpreting the Quranic verses from a gender perspective. So, and taking, because normally what happens, I'll just give one example of wife beating. I have come across many statements saying that, oh, Islam permits wife beating. I said, yes, Islam permits. You are saying only one part of this verse, while another part of this verse equally says how and why. What the man should do if he doesn't like the wife's behavior. So that the adjoining verses have not been interpreted properly, but which goes in the interest of one sets, the most of the verses have been interpreted in that way. So the interpretation and understanding, if I read one verse one day, I will think, okay, it has to be in this way. Next day, when I read this, I have another meaning also. So it depends how we interpret the verses. So the concept of Vilaya establishes that men have no level of superiority over women, as God orders both genders to guide one another and keep each other in check. The Quran states in chapter 9, verse 71, men and women are protectors of one another. They enjoin what is just and forbid what is evil. They observe regular prayers, practice regular charity, and obey Allah and His Messenger on them. Will Allah pour His mercy, for Allah is exalted in power wise. So it clearly says that no one is superior. And earlier also I said that the emphasis is on interdependence. So superiority, there are verses which says, but again there are simultaneously there is another verse which says that no one is superior. So what has happened during the interpretation of these verses, the most suitable verses which suited at that time, because you know when Islam emerged in Arabia, it was the female fetishes, all kinds of evils were there, and that was a nomadic society, tribal society. So whatever suited at that time, it was interpreted in that way. So we need to see that interpretation is one of the major issue when we talk about gender in Islam, interpretation of Quranic verses. I also don't accept hadith, because there are difference in hadith also. So as a woman, as a feminist, I try to restrict to the primary source. Whatever my knowledge goes, wherever my knowledge goes, so I try to stick to the primary source. Basic equality. The Quran states that both the male and female were created from the same soul, that is called nafs, N-A-F-S. Consequently, there is no hierarchy, even a temporal one, in gender creation. In the Quran, the fall of Adam is not blamed on Eve. Rather, both were tempted by Satan and sinned in the pursuit of power and eternal life. So, we can see from here that the blame is not on Eve. Both were blamed. Men and women are responsible towards God for their own mortal choices. They are both judged by the same standard. It's not that there is different parameter for men and the day of judgment, and there will be a single parameter for women on the day of judgment. So they will be judged by the same standard. They also have the same rights, duties, and obligation in matter of ibadat, the religious rituals. So I will come to then, having said that, what are the main issues? There is gender equality in Islam. So I really wonder if there is equality in Islam, and I have given ample surahs to prove that there is no superiority or superiority of men over women, then automatically the question which comes to one's mind is, then what is the main issue? If Islam has given so much of right to women, then why women are not getting their due? Why women are lagging behind? Why they are being subjugated in the name of the religious, the customary practices? All of you know that there are various practices going on in Muslim community which has no sanction in Quran, but still that has been practiced and widely practiced. The Dawoodi Bohra community, all of you must be knowing, they are practicing female genital mutilation, which is not mentioned in the Quran. So, what is the issue? What are the issues? Main issues. I have penned down a few issues, and I would like response from the participants also at the end of my presentation. Number one, the control over women in the name of religion, the selective uses of customs and traditions, selective and patriarchal interpretations, Islamic legal traditions, not making a distinction between the two main categories of legal ruling, that is, it is called in Arabic, we call it ahkam, legal ruling. What are those legal ruling? One is ibadat, that is a spiritual act or rituals, which every Muslim, whether men or women, they have to perform. We say that 5 pillars of Islam. And there is no distinction that men cannot do, women cannot do. All the believers, they have to do this obligation. Second is muamalat, contractual or social act. Right? So, normally what happens when we talk about women, it is the second ruling which dominates, and that is muamalat. All these what I have explained, right from education to political participation to inheritance to economic participation to marriage, all these comes under muamalat. So there is and one more issue which we need to think about, not making a distinction between understanding the Islamic law related to muamalat, that is second ruling, often reflect differences of jurisprudential opinion among major Muslim scholars. These differences have many roots, and allowing custom into the legal system is only one, and allowing them in the legal system is only one. So I would like to mention here that there are 4 schools of Islamic jurisprudence. Many of you might be knowing also. In India, especially I'm talking about India, that is Hanfi school of Islamic jurisprudence. There are Shafai, Malki and Hanbali. There are 4 schools of Islamic jurisprudence, but in India 90% of Muslims are from Hanfi school of thought. So there is difference in the interpretation of women's rights in these schools. For instance, I'll just give one example that before the enactment of Muslim Marriage Dissolution Act 1939, it was enacted in 1939. If there was a clause which Hanfi used to follow, that if whereabouts of a husband is not known, the women have to wait for 90 years. Just imagine what was the provision in the Hanfi school of thought. Then there was a discussion, there was a ijtihad amongst all 3 or 4 school of thought. Then the period was reduced to 5 years. So when people say that no, Islam doesn't give scope for change, it's absolutely wrong. There is provision of ijma, there is provision of ijtihad. We can have a dialogue, we can make changes as per the Quranic verses. So this is the distinction between, and hence the distinction between and relationship of culture and religion is critical for understanding Islamic jurisprudence. Just now I gave the example of this waiting period of a woman in Hanfi school of thought. So the distinction between and relationship of culture and religion is critical for understanding Islamic jurisprudence and the prevailing gender relations. Most importantly, the Quran is the revealed word of God, whereas culture is human fabrication. So while a Muslim woman is bound by every later word and phrase in the Quran, she is not bound similarly by her cultural values. So ibadat, if we see ibadat, there is no distinction between men and women. But when it comes to muamalat, the status and rights of, and most of the rights are within this ahkam, this Islamic ruling, that is muamalat. So this is what I have to say about the Quranic injunction, its understanding / misunderstanding, the main issues which we need to keep in mind when we talk about Muslim women. Muslim women is not homogeneous group. There is heterogeneity amongst Muslim, even in India. There is no homogeneous. Muslim women they are equally victim of patriarchy. It's not that they patriarchy doesn't affect them. Patriarchy, patriarchal mindset, patriarchal structure equally affect them. And it increases when the religious misinterpretation is added in that. So we have to be very, very careful when we talk about status of women in Islam. Islam has given ample right. There is one also, there are main two worldview. When we talk about Muslim women, there are mainly two worldview. One is Western worldview, which has this impression that, oh, they are the most victimized, most pathetic creature of the world without having any right. Second view is glorification of Islam. Oh, Islam has given this, Islam has given that. 1400 years ago, Islam has given this much of right, that much of right. But what is the reality? If the rights are there, why we have to fight for our rights? Why there was a need for one more law for Muslim women in India? The Muslim Marriage Dissolution Act was there, in which she had given right to divorce to her husband. Khula, the provision of khula is there in the Quran. If she doesn't like, there is incident in Prophet's life that a woman comes and says, I want a divorce from my husband. Then the Prophet Muhammad asked, doesn't he loves you? Doesn't he maintains you? Doesn't he take care of you? She said, no, he does everything, but I don't like him. So he said, okay, you can have khula. So these things which goes, my argument have been that which goes in favor of women, it is not highlighted. It is irrespective of religion. It's not only Islam. All world religions, whichever goes in favor of women, it is not being properly or adequately addressed. So so we need to think the gap, the discrepancy between the textual Islam and the ritualistic Islam. If we hammer this ritualistic Islam, then automatically whatever rights, whatever equality has been mentioned in the Quran, women would not be denied of those rights. So I will end my first section here. Professor Mani Miklai, shall I go ahead or shall I wait for the questions?
No, I think you can cover the next part also. Then we'll have questions. Otherwise, it'll
Okay.
you will be short of time. Yeah, please. That is
Okay.
also important, equally important.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mani Miklai. So now I am coming to the issue of divorce. What does the Quran say about divorce? Right? According to the reputed and authentic hadith, the talaq is one of the most disliked acts that a believer can perform. Islam tolerates talaq by making provision for it under highly unfavorable conditions only as the last resort. In words of Prophet Muhammad, of all the lawful things, divorce is the most hated by Allah. Women's property is not divided during divorce. Whatever a woman earns or is given before and during the course of the marriage remains her property if the marriage ends. This prevents men from taking advantage of women's property or wealth through marriage. On the other hand, man's property is divided if, it's very important, if divorce occurs according to the couple's marriage contract. A woman is entitled to support and maintenance from her former husband if she requires. There are Quran Surah 2, Ayat 229, chapter 4, Ayat 20, 60, 59. Then again, Surah Nisa, Ayat 231. There are various 7, 8 ayats which says about this. There are three kinds of
We have to acquire the knowledge continuously, hard work with devotion, perseverance. These are the 4 unique tools.
Sorry, Neela, what is this in between? Yeah, go ahead, Professor.
Okay.
Sabia, you can.
Yeah. There are 3 kinds of talaq that are being practiced in Muslim society. One is talaq-e-biddat, talaq-e-ahsan, and talaq-e-hasan. Only the latter 2 find relevance in Quran. This is very important to note that in Quran, the talaq-e-hasan and talaq-e-ahsan, only these 2 types of talaq is mentioned in the Quran. And there is a proper procedure for pronouncing talaq. So, and talaq-e-biddat, there is no mention of talaq-e-biddat in Quran. Biddat means innovation in religion and is unacceptable in Islam, a religion that has laid down guidelines for the world to follow till the very end of time. So, innovations is not allowed in Islam. And talaq-e-biddat is an innovation. This form of talaq, we have 2 sects, Shia and Sunni. So this form of talaq-e-biddat is generally practiced amongst the Sunni sect. How did this dispute arise? Talaq-e-biddat, from where it came up? So it is said that there's an interesting story. Just 2 minutes I'll take to mention that story. It is said that Hazrat Umar, the second Khalifa, had for some time allowed talaq-e-biddat, but later reinforced the proper talaq because men have started misusing it. And began to take the elaborate procedure very casually. The evil seeds of this practice were thus sown. Therefore, the irrevocable talaq was not the practice during his life. Its origin goes back in the 2nd century of Islamic era. According to Amir Ali, I'll quote, this mode of talaq was introduced by Umayyad kings because they found the checks in the Prophet's formula of talaq inconvenient, the word inconvenient to them. Since then, this mode of talaq has been in practice among the Sunni Muslims. So there is a history, how it occurred. Now, let me come to the Muslim women protection of rights of marriage Act, the main theme, which I have some reservation. Maybe you people, the participants, won't agree with me, but I have some reservations. So I have to share it with you, and since I am writing something on this, so I need your inputs also. The practice of triple talaq has been going on in our country since a long time, even though Muslim dominated and Islamic countries such as Pakistan and Saudi Arabia have already banned it. So Muslim Women Protection of Rights on Marriage Act 2019, it's 1 year now since this was enacted. So there are three laws act which specifically deals with the matrimonial rights of Muslim women, that is marriage and divorce. One is, I'm not talking about Shariat Application Act. I'm just talking about the thing related to marriage and divorce. One is Muslim Marriage Dissolution Act 1939. Second is Muslim Women Act 1986, and in the series this is the third act which was enacted last year in August and named as Muslim Women Protection of Rights on Marriage Act. Especially, I would like to draw attention of the participant. Mani Meklai, please tell me how for how long I can go. 10 minutes?
Yeah, 10 minutes. Yeah.
Okay, it's 3:21, so I have to finish it by 3:30. So especially I will be talking about chapter 2 and chapter 3 of this act. Talaq to be void and illegal by words either spoken or written or in electronic form or in any other manner whatsoever. I'm not saying that this pronouncement of triple talaq in one go was good. It was very bad. Even I have many narration of women who have faced it, who never got their maintenance, who never got their meher back, who never got the maintenance for their children. It was very, very bad. I do agree it was very, very bad. But that was talaq-e-biddat. So second point is punishment for pronouncing talaq shall be punished with imprisonment for a term which may extend to 3 years and shall also be liable to fine. Third, subsistence allowance shall be entitled to receive from her husband such amount of subsistence allowance for her and dependent children as may be determined by the magistrate. Number 4, custody of minor children shall be entitled to custody of her minor children in the event of pronouncement of talaq by her husband in such manner as may be determined by the magistrate. Just I'm emphasizing the word magistrate. Offense to be cognizable, compoundable. Cognizable. If information relating to the commission of offense is given to an officer in charge of a police station by the married Muslim woman upon whom talaq is pronounced, or any person related to her by blood or marriage. Any person. Compoundable. At the instance of married Muslim women upon whom talaq is pronounced with the permission of the magistrate on such terms and conditions as he may determine. The magistrate will determine the conditions and terms. And number 6 is repeal and savings. That has nothing much to say. That is why I'm not emphasizing on that. So these are the, in chapter 2 and chapter 3, there are 5 points which we need again to think about how this is going to help the divorced Muslim women. So my disagreement is criminalizing triple talaq may not have the deterrent effect as Parliament desires and as the Act has mentioned, and could lead to more complications. And what are those complications? I have some apprehension because I am getting some information from my field area that husbands are not pronouncing talaq. They are sending their wives back to their natal family, or there is an increase in the violence. So this act, because there is a provision of polygamy, he is not divorcing his wife, he is using other tactics. So the major weakness of this act, what I found, okay, fine, you have done this cognizable offense, but at the same time something should have done about polygamy also, which is not there. And you know, Islam has a provision of polygamous marriage, and there are grounds. So the repercussion was not thought about if it could have been circulated in the women's studies circle. At least some input should have come. According to the last census, more than 2 million women live separated from their husbands. So it is going to increase the number of separated women in Muslim community. As I said, I am all such husbands. Many of victims, many the victims of the desertion. Let the law punish all such husbands and not just Muslim men. My second reservation is that a woman will be less likely to report, because by going public, she risks her husband getting jailed. And the imprisonment would deprive the family of a stable source of income, especially for daily wage earning families. Secondly, pressing criminal charges against the husband for pronouncing these words will not save the marriage. So these two are very important points. Another point, how this act is going to help women if the former husband, who is supposed to provide alimony, finds himself in jail. Further, the excessive formalities present in the law. Similarly, like Muslim Women Act 1986, there was lots and lots of formality. Same is happening in this act also. So there are excessive formalities present in the law would be inaccessible to the vast majority of poor and often poorly educated women who doesn't know how to go about it, where to go, whom to seek help. The another one, moreover, giving the women custody of her child is also an unnecessary token action, as it is already provided for by the Guardian and Ward Act 1890. And also in Muslim Shariat Application Act 1939. So therefore, criminalizing marital rape and improving women's security irrespective of religious sect should have been a greater priority than making it cognizable offense. Also, it would have been better if triple talaq could have been classified as an act of verbal and emotional abuse under the Domestic Violence Act, which have this provision. This would have opened up avenues to multiple reliefs like protection against violence, right to residence in the marital home, maintenance, medical facilities, and compensation. Therefore, this is my personal opinion. You may agree, you may not agree, that there is a need to have comprehensive law on Muslim marriage that will end all kinds of injustice to Muslim women, like nikah halala. I do not know how many of you know about nikah halala. If she is divorced and the husband wants her back, then she has to get married again and consummate her marriage, and the second husband has to divorce her. Then the former husband can take her. So, like nikah halala, it would be able to return to her and polygamy. These three things. In my opinion, by enacting this law, we have invited another problem, that is an increase in polygamous marriage, I said earlier, and increased violence against women. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for your thought-provoking words about
Yeah.
gender concerns in Islam. Thank you so much, ma'am. Participants, do you have any queries?
Madam?
If you have any, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Dr. Gopal Singh.
Ma'am,
Yeah. After that, I'll.
Madam, I do not have anything, because for the second part of your lecture, other participants will just talk to you. First, regarding the first part of your lecture, I would like to mention here the Sachar Committee report, which was very lately appointed in 2005. It reports that the 2001 total Muslim population is 13.4%. 2011, it was only 14.2%. And it expects that by 2100, the Muslim population may stabilize at 17 to 18 or 19%. That is not a question here, madam. With regard to the work participation among the Muslims among themselves, 2001, it was 47.5% men, only 14.1% women work participation. 2011, 49.5%, and 14.8% women work participation. So that's one thing. So the SACHAR committee or any other report does not make any detailed data study about the gender studies, particularly men and women among Muslims. With regard to the recruitment in central government appointments, 2006 and 7, only 6.93% of the Muslims were recruited. 2007 and 8, it was 8.27. 2011 and 12, it was 10.5% Muslims were recruited in government departments, central government.
Sir, your voice is breaking.
Hello?
Sir, your voice is breaking.
Hello?
Sir, your voice is breaking.
Yeah. Am I
Your
audible?
voice is breaking.
Am I
Yeah,
audible
yeah.
now?
Yeah,
You're
now,
audible.
now
Yeah,
okay.
now.
See, the data shows that recruitment practices are very less. 2011, 10 and 11, it was 10.5% Muslims in the central government recruitment. It has come down to 8.5% in 2014 and 15. With regard to the education, I have to appreciate because 2001, 51% of the Muslims were literates, whereas other communities 64.8%. 2011, 68.5% Muslims were literate, whereas the other communities 73%. Only in this, there is no much difference between the Muslim minority community and others. SACHAR committee also says the percentage of IAS officers should increase from 3% to 4%. Even now, after the report of 15 years, the increase in the IPS and IAS Muslim percentage only 3.1 to 3.3%. That's all. So what I suggest here is this. The committee has said, but it is not implemented. For the entire upliftment of the not only women, but also the entire Muslim minority community, these are the recommendations. Equal Opportunity Commission to be appointed, nomination procedures in the public bodies, link madrasa with the higher secondary school boards, increase employment percentage, recognize the degrees of madrasas, and create a data bank. Madam, it is not any criticism, it is not any question, it's only an addition. I leave the other participants with regard to the second part of our lecture, and I would like to listen to that discussion also about triple talaq and other those things. Thank you, madam. Thank you. I have given 3 to 4 lectures on SACHAR committee report.
Ma'am, I want to ask.
Can
Ma'am, I want to ask.
Yes, yes.
Let's collect the questions and then respond so that time will be saved. Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes.
can I ask a question, please?
Yeah, yeah. Yes, please.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm Dr. Shobha Shinde. I had some doubts, ma'am, that when the bill against triple talaq
Ma'am,
was
your voice is,
passed,
ma'am, your voice is
When the-
breaking.
when the law against triple talaq was passed, Muslim women themselves objected to it. The second
Yeah.
question is that Muslim women are still not allowed to go to the mosque. How are the women activists coping up with this issue? And the third is, when will polygamy be abolished from the Muslim society? Thank you.
What is your third question, ma'am? What is your third question?
Will the
When will the
polygamy
polygamy
be
will be abolished?
This was about
abolished?
polygamy.
Yeah.
When will it be abolished?
Your
The question is,
Voice
when
is
will the
not
polygamy
audible.
be abolished?
I didn't get your third question. 2 questions.
Yeah, I am repeating, Sabia. When will? Yeah, I am repeating.
Mani,
Can you hear
please.
me?
Yeah. Yeah.
I am Mani Meklai
Yeah.
repeating. So she is asking, when will the polygamy be abolished?
Abolished.
You got it?
Okay.
Yeah. Shobha, your voice is breaking. So now we'll, yeah, Professor Sabia will now respond. Then we'll take other questions.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Shall I
please.
respond?
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Sir, Dr. Gopal, with your question, SACHAR committee, I did object when Abu Saleh Sharif was presenting this in Jamia Millia Islamia, this such a report, I raised this question. Being a student of women's studies, I raised this question to Abu Saleh Sharif, who was member of that such a committee report, that why there is hardly any mention of Muslim women. Only one small section is on Muslim women. That is that too, that 70% of the Muslim women are in home-based work. And rest of the data, there is no mention of Muslim women, the status, educational, political, economic status of Muslim women. So that was my first question to Professor Dr. Abu Saleh Sharif. So I don't want to share the response which he gave, the reply which he gave, which was not very women friendly. So I'll restrict myself for that. Second thing, you have rightly pointed out that not only women, the whole community, even when you go back to 1983 Gopal Singh Commission report, that was for all the minorities, including Muslim. The recommendation of Gopal Singh Commission report and the recommendation of Sachar Committee report, the recommendation of Amitabh Kundu Committee report, it has not been implemented. So recommendations after recommendations are there, but what actually is required is there is a I would say that there is a lack of political will to improve the socio-economic and political status. Only since independence, only 3% of Muslim representation in parliament is only 3% of Muslim women. And similarly, the representation of Muslims in parliament, you can see, although the percentage of women in parliament has increased from 2014 election to this recent 19 election. But what about Muslim women? They were there since 1952, first election, the number has not increased. So it's not, we should not blame the government only. It has always been my submission that we should not blame government only. We should blame ourselves as well. Why we are not asserting? So it's both way. And regarding you, madam, Muslim women are not allowed to enter into mosque. This is again misconception. When you go to the pilgrimage of Makkah, you see all men and women are taking the round of Kaaba together. There is no separate line for women. There is no separate line for men. So again, this is created misconception that women cannot go to the mosque. Of course, the one restriction which has been put is the period of purity. When the woman is not menstruating, she can go to the mosque. So it is again a myth that women cannot go to the mosque. Second question is polygamy will be abolished. That is why I will be abolished. Am I correct? Can you type them?
I'm asking when will it be abolished? When will it be abolished?
He's asking when will it be abolished?
Abolished. Yes, yes.
When will polygamy
Abolished.
be
That
abolished?
is what I am saying. When
Yeah, it's difficult.
when it will be abolished? It's difficult, but the act which came last year, if it would have been taken both the issue simultaneously, then it would not have been a problem, because there are many countries which have abolished polygamy also. So touching one thing, leaving one thing, it will create more problem for women, which I can foresee, which will create more problem for women. Anything else?
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, I want to ask one question. My two observations I want to make. One is with respect to marriage. Second
Please,
is,
please introduce yourself.
Yeah, ma'am,
Savita.
I'm Dr. Shweta. So my observation is with respect to marriage, like what I feel, Islam is not gender sensitive. Like Islam permit only the Muslim men, he may marry even a non-Muslim women, but non-Muslim women, Muslim women is not allowed to marry non-Muslim. She can marry only a Muslim woman. Second, in divorce, Muslim men, he may divorce his wife without assigning any reason. Like in last year only, the Supreme Court declared the pronouncement of triple talaq in one go declared void, and later on, the act came into existence. Now, my question is pertaining to, the act which says pronouncement of triple talaq in one go makes a criminal offense, and the husband is subject to 3 years of imprisonment. Now my question is, now talaq is void. Okay, talaq is not valid. Triple talaq is not valid. Talaq in one sitting, talaq, it is not valid. But when the husband, now the husband has served 3 years of imprisonment, okay, after the expiry of the 3 years of imprisonment, when the husband will come back, because the marriage is valid. Now the question is, because the marriage between the husband and wife is valid, so will this act makes a marriage void or not? Because husband is not going to accept the wife because she sent him to the imprisonment. So what would happen to that marriage? This is my question.
I think that
Okay.
yeah, now you can. That is all the concerns Professor Sabya expressed. Anyway, you please.
Yeah. I would, regarding your first question, Islam is not gender sensitive. I don't agree with you. Islam per se is gender sensitive. But the encroachment of various cultural practices has made it gender insensitive. You have given the example of a Muslim man can marry a non-Muslim, but a Muslim woman cannot marry a non-Muslim. Regarding that also, it is written that a Muslim man can marry to Ahle Kitab. Similarly, a Muslim woman can also marry an Ahle Kitab. What is Ahle Kitab?
Kitabiya.
The bookish, yeah, Ahle
Yeah.
Kitabiya.
Yeah.
The bookish religion. So the rights are given to both, but the restriction which has put for men is equally put for women. Second, about without any reason, assigning any reason, divorce. He can divorce his wife without assigning any reason. As I said in my presentation, that this is, first of all, talaq is the most detestful thing in the eyes of God. Second, this is talaq-e-biddat, which was practicing in India, especially in India. Rest of the countries, they have banned this practice of triple talaq. So talaq-e-biddat, I told you about the story, how it came into being, how did it arise, what was the interest of the people at that time to introduce this kind of talaq. So talaq-e-biddat is not acceptable form of talaq in
But ma'am,
Quran.
even in Hassan and
So
Ehsan, the
when this
husband may
act
divorce.
was brought into in our country, yes, please.
Ma'am, what I was saying, even in, I'm not talking about triple talaq, talaqul biddat. My question is, even in case of Ehsan and Hassan, husband may pronounce talaq to his wife without assigning any reason.
No. Talaq-e-Ahsan, there is a proper procedure with a witness, and there is period of tohur. There is a period of tohur in which he has to pronounce. Then there is it's a guideline for in talaq-e-Ahsan. There is a proper guideline in Quran how a man can pronounce, and after pronouncement also, this is, if if both of them, he has to give back all the, which I read in my this thing also, that the property, the earnings, whatever she has, he has to give. Regarding 3, even I have this you have said that if he comes back after 3 years, he has already pronounced the talaq and he is in the jail. So when he comes back, if he wants to take it back, if the wife wants to again to live with the husband, she has to go for halala. So once he goes to he pronounces talaq and goes
But
to
ma'am,
the
talaq is not valid because already the court declared it void. The question is, the court has already declared that triple talaq void.
Yeah.
So then there is no
that is why he was sent.
halala.
That is why he is sent to jail. So I do agree with you that if it is void, then when he comes back, what would happen to the wife?
Yeah.
That is my concern. Maybe I have missed that section. That is also my concern, that if he comes back, what would happen? So that there are lacunas in this act. What I want to emphasize is that there are lacuna in this act. Before enacting this law, it should have been circulated widely for the opinion, which was done, but not adequately done.
Yeah,
Then why the wife
I
needs
think
to
we have done, and there are some questions. I also fully agree with you, Professor Saiba, for the reasons highlighted. Only thing, it has not been widely circulated to hear from non-Muslim scholars also, because understanding the various aspects of whether it is Quran or other surahs you have mentioned, it's quite difficult for the scholars who are not working on the Islamic issues. But in general, what has been gone to the society, the understanding is that what has been now practiced is all from Quran. That is the tragedy. You have made it clear that Quran has been very, very progressive in everything, providing gender equality. But what has been later interpreted and practiced are all different. And unfortunately, it has been given to understand that what is being practiced is actually Islam, and that is to be made clear to everyone. And the second, as far as this triple talaq is concerned, by the sight of it, it appears, oh, now the government has brought a law to safeguard women, but actually it is not. That understanding hasn't gone to all who are actually glorifying the act that triple talaq. If it's a criminal offense, and if you do you will be present. And I also have my own concern on all the issues you have highlighted, particularly who will be when you are. It is to criminally charge your own husband, and women may not be willing to, given already Dr. Gopal Singh also pointed about the worker participation rate, the very, very poor participation rate of women. Of course, home-based work is there. It is difficult for women, even if it is cruelty, the extreme form of violence, they won't go and make them complain against the husbands as it is a criminal charge. And second, of course, you spelled out about excessive formalities. Women still given again the kind of socialization, how a woman should be behaving, how she should be dociling herself, etc. That is there, and even that also has been misinterpreted. And this excessive formalities will definitely be affecting them. And as you rightly pointed out, what is the question of the maintenance when he himself, the husband himself, is imprisoned. And as one of the participants have also asked the concerns that if he comes back, what would be the destiny of the women? So these are all the concerns where the feminist scholars and women's studies scholars have been raising against this 1-year-old triple talaq Muslim Law Act, Protection Act 2019. and still it is under discussion. And as you said, there is a comprehensive law. In fact, it should have been focused more on maintenance, protecting them from domestic violence, etc. But it doesn't have those aspects. In fact, we should have devoted more time for this also. But there is only 1 hour time. We have to balance both, and it is very important that the Quran, what is Quran, how gender equal it is, and how gender equal promoting it is also to be communicated to the participants. So in that sense, it is right balance of both. But we have to work collectively to actually understand what is this 1-year-old law is being either helping the women or not helping the women. So Neela, please see
Yes, ma'am.
whether there is any.
I think madam has left the meeting, ma'am.
Oh, she has left. No, by many connections, etc. Okay, we'll close.
Yes,
I
ma'am.
don't think that
Madam,
she will
Yes,
be.
ma'am.
actually, madam is tired. She needed rest. Okay, no problem. Just say
Yes,
what
I'm here. Yes, I'm here.
Oh, okay, fine.
Oh,
Got
come back.
disconnected.
That's thing, but I was making my points. I fully
Yeah.
agree with you, Professor Savia, for all the whatever the points which I have endorsed, whatever you have expressed, and also the final point made by one of our participants that how difficult it is for the wife to face the man who will be returning from the prison. So I only was appealing that we need more discussion on this law, and it has to have, as you rightly pointed out, it has to be a comprehensive law, focusing more on the maintenance and protecting from domestic violence, and the very principle of this or the politics of making this triple talaq criminal offense should be discussed, and dialogues are needed further to make them understand in the mainstream also. So this is
Exactly.
what I have also. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it is time we have to conclude. Almost it is 4. So Neela, please.
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon, one and all. It gives me an immense pleasure to thank our today's resource person, Professor Sabia Hussain, Director, Sarojini Naidu Center for Women Studies, Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi. Thank you, ma'am, for your excellent presentation about gender concerns in Islam. Thank you very much, ma'am. At this juncture, I wish to express my sincere thanks to our dynamic madam, Dr. Mrs. V. Sujata, Principal, Kaveri College for Women Autonomous, for her continuous support and encouragement throughout the program. I offer my sincere thanks to Dr. N. Manimekhalai, Dean, Faculty of Arts, Director and Head, Department of Women's Studies, Bhardas University, Dr. N. Murugeshwari, Professor, Department of Women's Studies, Bhardas University, Dr. S. Shubha, Assistant Professor, Department of Women's Studies, Bhardas University, for their continuous support and encouragement to conduct this program. Last but not the least, I register my sincere thanks to all the participants for their active participation. Thank you all. Meet you all tomorrow. Thank you.